With globalization in full effect, people and goods are traveling faster and farther than ever before. But all that movement comes at a high cost, speaking from a purely environmental point of view. The most concerning part of this is that at a time where the emissions of greenhouse gases have to decline drastically, the transport sector is showing a significant annual increase of emissions.
Total emissions from the transport sector were responsible for over 24% of global CO2 emissions in 2016. 14% of total greenhouse gases emitted in 2016 came from the transport sector. Emissions have increased with every form of transportation with the exception of railways, which show a comparably high level of electrification of around 39%. The principal offenders of the transportation sector are road vehicles. With 72%, they are responsible for more than 2/3 of all emissions caused by transport. The records have revealed a dramatic growth in global energy consumption related to transport in the first 15 years of the 21st century. While consumption increased by 44%, emissions only registered a 31% growth, reflecting a slight progress regarding efficiency. However, this progress is overshadowed by the sheer speed of the transportation sector's growth rate. The oil demand of the sector has increased by a quarter, showing the still high dependency on fossil fuels. In fact, the sector accounts for more than 2/3 of the world's oil consumption. Numbers like these pose an immense threat to the Paris Agreement and other global climate goals.
That's why it's more important than ever before to highlight these issues and discuss them in our documentary. I'm Edwin.
And I'm Luca.
And you're watching
The Blind Hype. With increased general awareness about climate change and its catastrophic effects, people that have the financial means to do so have started to look for greener alternatives. It is no surprise that the popularity of electric vehicles, or EVs, has skyrocketed during the last decade. Manufacturers like Tesla or Hyundai have produced some serious challengers to some of today's top combustion engine cars and significantly improved the reputation of EVs in the last decade. In 2010, only an insignificant number of 17,000 EVs were on the world's roads. Since then, the number has increased exponentially, resulting in more than 2 million EVs on the roads in 2019. We have come so far that in 2016, global sales of EVs had affected emissions so strongly that the average fuel economy improved by 0.1 miles per gallon globally. But what exactly are the deciding factors that persuade consumers to buy an EV instead of a combustion engine car? We asked a young buyer exactly that question.
Well, I like the color.
Well, maybe our reporter/weatherman Edwin can give us a bit more insightful information on that topic.
It is apparent that the current developments in the automotive industry point towards a rapid electrification within the next few years. However, the question remains open. Are electric cars really better than combustion engine cars? In order to answer this question, we need to look at one thing in particular: the emissions. But what even are emissions? In order to better discuss this, we need to split emissions into two different subcategories. Direct emissions are the emissions produced by a vehicle when it is in use. In other words, when it travels from A to B. These emissions are the typical greenhouse gases such as CO2 and nitrous oxide. Indirect emissions mainly consist of the generation and transportation of fuels and electricity, as well as the production and disposal of cars and their batteries. While it is obvious that electric cars hold the edge over combustion engine cars in the world of direct emissions, indirect emissions are where the electric car lays its carbon footprint down. This is due to one key component, namely the battery. These car batteries are made up of several earth elements, such as lithium, nickel, cobalt, or graphite, which require extensive mining activities. This leads to a heavy pollution through radioactive and tailing waste, not to mention the illegal and maltreated material extraction, which is performed by cheap workforces, child labor, and other notorious methods throughout third world countries, such as the cobalt mines in Congo. Even worse for climate change is the improper disposal of the lithium-ion batteries. For instance, in the EU market alone, only 5% of lithium was being collected, while the rest was simply incinerated or dumped into landfills. These lithium-ion batteries lead to landfill fires, which can smolder for many years and as a result release several toxic chemicals into the air, which not only negatively affect our breathing, but also contribute to global warming.
As bad as this might sound, there is no denying that in the long run, electric cars produce significantly less total emissions than fossil fuel-powered cars. This graph shows quite well how the two types of automobiles compare emission-wise. While the starting emissions on day zero are much higher for the EV due to battery production, the amount of emissions shows little to no growth in the following years. On the other hand, cars with an internal combustion engine have a smaller day zero emission amount. However, these emissions show a linear growth with every year, amounting to a much higher total in the long run. So, in conclusion, the emission gap between an EV and a fossil fuel-powered car increases with time. Yet EVs are still far from perfect. With the heavy amount of pollution being generated from both the mining of valuable resources and the improper disposal of batteries, electric cars still impose a threat to the environment. Furthermore, the indirect emissions produced by the generation and transportation of electrical energy also raises further concerns for the future. We've talked to EV expert Dalma Oros about these problems and discussed possible solutions with her.
Well, to best tackle these problems, a few solutions must be successfully and meaningfully applied in order to ensure an almost emission-free future for the world of automobiles. And so the most popular ones, lithium-ion batteries, must be recycled on a major scale. And to best do this, a method known as pyrometallurgical recovery may be the most efficient in recovering previously mined minerals to then be reused. This method focuses on the smelting of batteries in order to extract the precious minerals found within the battery. And this would not only majorly decrease the emissions being produced by disposed batteries, but also help limit the need for newly mined resources. Direct recycling of lithium-ion batteries is another promising method which may prove to be very effective for low cost. And this is a process which includes the extraction of electrolytes, carbon dioxides, industrial shredding, cathode healing, and finally the building of new cells with recycled cathodes and anodes. This process is hugely advantageous, as almost all battery components can then be recovered and reused for newer batteries for a cheaper price than other methods. But the major focus should be set on using renewable energy to charge the cars. In comparison, the total emissions of EVs that were charged 100% with electricity from renewable energy sources throughout their life cycle were significantly lower than those of EVs charged partly or fully using electricity from fossil fuels. This means that solely purchasing an EV is not inherently a responsible decision. It is the way you charge it that determines how green your car really is.
In a perfect world, the automotive industry will produce only EVs which will be able to run with close to no emissions. Batteries and electricity should be able to be produced and transported at an absolute minimum emission rate. Life cycles of batteries will be enormous, and they rarely will ever have to get charged or replaced because the recycling process functions perfectly. When they do get charged, customers have a wide selection of charging stations that use solely electricity from renewable energy sources.
But of course, this perfect world is simply not possible. With the demand for EVs currently exploding, it is unrealistic that the emissions from mining and transporting the raw materials for the batteries will go down or even stay the same. The current hype around EVs will cause emissions in the manufacturing process to rise exponentially. The amount of energy used to recycle the batteries is enormous. Therefore, the whole process is widely regarded as inefficient and simply not worth it. In many countries, renewable energy alone would never be able to power every single car on the road, as the facilities are currently not developed far enough. There is no doubt that EVs play a major role in the transport of tomorrow. However, if we continue to buy into the blind hype around EVs, we might just find ourselves in a different version of the same story that we are experiencing with fossil fuel cars right now.
It's so cold.
In 2010, ich hab's. Okay, next one.
Automotive industry point towards a rapid electrification of
Within the next week! In 2010, only an insignificant number of 10. So many
when it travels from A to B. These emissions, typically, gases, frequently what? When is for greenhouse gases. My feet are getting so tired, I'm sorry.
1 miles per gallon globally.
Did it, man!
You got it!